first up, let's welcome Eric Termuende of Now Innovations. Eric is a thought leader on optimizing workplace culture, the future of work, and engagement in the workplace. He is an entrepreneur and the best-selling author of Rethink Work. Eric is the co-founder of Now Innovations, an organization that democratizes access to the most innovative people, culture, and operational practices for HR. Let's give a very warm welcome to Eric Termuende.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for having me. Leroy, I heard we have 70 people under the age of 35 here today, so that's fantastic. That's a record. And when we talk about this next generation, I'm obviously fascinated to hear about how this next generation, these millennials, these Gen Zs or Gen Zs can contribute to the workplace. But where I'd like to start in this future of work conversation is actually just with a personal event that happened last week. I was helping a family member move, and I saw this in the bookshelf, and this was a popular science magazine from 1980, you can see at the top. The price was $1.50, and when I was flipping through this to page 39, I saw some pretty innovative technology. That was the new Canon palm printer. A fascinating device that I think my dad got for Christmas that year, and was just fascinating. I looked in, and the internet was invented in 1983, so this is before the internet, when the Volkswagen Rabbit had its hatchback for the first time. This was not that long ago, actually. This obviously was less than 40 years ago. And when we talk about this future of work conversation, I think it's a fascinating conversation to have, because we can be talking about what Ian was talking about this morning. We could be talking about technology, about blockchain, and everything included. But when I talk about the future of work, I think it's a little bit more personal. It's a little bit more about the people. I actually think the future of work is bigger than just work itself. I think the future of work is about our happiness, our teams, our families, our volunteer associations, and everything in between. Ultimately, it is a bigger identifier of who we are now than it's ever been before. And I think this is a conversation that we haven't been having yet. Because when I hear about the future of work, or when I talk about the future of work, or when I ask about the future of work, it seems like this big sort of foggy, ambiguous cloud. We don't have that crystal ball. We don't really see into the future all of that well. And when I hear the most common words about the future of work, I hear a lot of starting words: uncertain, unaware, unclear, undefined. And what I want to say today, from an organizational perspective, when we're looking to attract and retain talent, that the future of work is not something that we fall into. It's something that we create. It's something that we create on an organizational basis. And I think that this conversation here today is going to evolve to be so much bigger than a millennial or a generational conversation. It's going to be one that is all-encompassing of all generations. And if I had it my way, we'd actually strip this whole idea of generations altogether. And we'll get into that a little bit more. But there's two things in my very short time with you that I want to talk about before Michelle takes the stage. And then we get into a bit of a question and answer period. And the two things that I want to talk about are number one, to understand where we are and how we got here. So a little bit of an evolution of work progression, a little bit of an evolution of technology progression, without getting into too much of the AI and blockchain conversation like Ian this morning. But number two is to rethink culture and talent attraction. My book, Rethink Work, came out just last year. And the idea of that book is to totally remove the negative connotation associated with work, so that we can enjoy that thing we do more than anything else in a day. I mean, it's not very often now that we work from 9 to 5, that we check in, that we check out, that it's this transactional experience. It's much different. So what I want to do first, of course, is dive into understanding where we are and how we got here. And much like Ian, I want to reintroduce you to this idea of the Industrial Revolution chain. Now, we've had the first Industrial Revolution back in the 1780s. Second Industrial Revolution, 1870s, we're looking at mass production assembly line. Think Ford, Model A, Model T. And think, too, not just about the technology that we had access to, but think of how our lives were looking when we had this form of employment. We look at today at Industry 4.0, we see that 36% of the world is freelancing now, the Western world is freelancing now, and by 2027 that number will jump up north of 50%. You see, obviously the automation of computers and electronics, we've seen that for quite some time now, but when I look at this future of work, the future of work was supposed to be this incredibly positive, forward-thinking, optimistic idea where we could mail it in for, at least for a 3-day weekend, where universal basic income was top of mind, where we could work less and have more free time. Artificial intelligence would take care of the things that we didn't want to do. Robotics and machine learning would probably take care of the rest. And we'd be sitting here living on a government-subsidized pension that basically started when we were in school age, and we can enjoy that much more to life. And you know, that might be coming. Singularity is supposed to be here maybe 2045. I'm not buying it. And what we really need to be considering now is when we look at this work, when we look at the idea, the notion of work, what is it that we're getting out of it? How is it that we're attracting and retaining talent, and what story are we telling? And to look at this evolution of work, I want to introduce you to a theory called Buckminster-Fuller's knowledge doubling curve. Has anyone heard of Buckminster-Fuller's theory? We've got a couple people in the back. For those who are unfamiliar with his theory states that before the year 1900, the amount of information that we had access to doubled every 100 years, okay? So that didn't mean that we were twice as smart. It means society as a whole was aware of or knew twice as much. So from 1800 to 1900, the amount of information that we had access to doubled. From 1900, and after 1900, the amount of information we had access to doubled at a half the rate. So from 1900 to 1950, the amount of information that we had access to doubled. From 1950 to 75, it doubled again. From 75 to 88, it doubled again. From 88 to 93, it doubled again. And to now we're at the point now, I was actually speaking at a conference in Beverly Hills just last year, and the head of IBM's Watson supercomputer said that the amount of information that we have access to now doubles every 13 months. He said that 90% of the information on the internet today was put there in the past 2 years. Pretty incredible stuff. So the world as we know it is moving faster than it ever has before, and everything that I like to talk about is more on a personal basis. It's based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And I think that in the wake of new technology, I wonder if we're actually getting the sense of belongingness and love, this esteem needs and self-actualization that we did in decades and centuries previous. Because when I look at, about the 1980s, we started to see a decline in work. Technology was advancing, we had the ability to automate, we had the ability ultimately to work fewer hours. But this is a graph that I was actually shown at an agriculture conference in Mississauga back in December. And I looked at this, and perhaps ironically, I was sitting in the back of the room, and I pulled out my smartphone, and I Googled, what was the technology in the year 2000? Does anyone remember what came out in 1998? The Palm Pilot. The Palm Pilot came out in 1998, 20 years ago. And so I looked on my 4G LTE network, and I said, what was the capacity in terms of memory of this Palm Pilot? The answer, 512 kilobytes. What is the capacity of that new iPhone that came out 2 weeks ago? My mom calls it the new iPhone tennis. And it's 524 gigabytes. 1,048,000 times the capacity that this Palm Pilot had, 20 years. And so when I look at this trend, I think we can all agree that we're working more now than we ever have before. Work isn't check-in, check-out. It's not transactional. In fact, when we look at the Internet of Things and we look at this future of work conversation, we're in this explosive era like we've never seen before. We're looking at global internet traffic. We're going to see 50 billion devices connected less than 2 years from now, 1 and a bit. We're going to see global internet traffic explode. We're going to see from 2016 to 2021 fivefold in internet traffic. We're seeing even cell phone plans. If it's not 10 gigabytes, it's even more now. I'm guilty of going over last month, a little bit embarrassed about it. But when we look at this idea of work, we even take it back a couple of decades, we see that we had this very routine day. We slept until about 6 or whatever it was. We got up, we prepped. According to StatsCan, we take about a 24-minute commute to work. We then work until lunch, go for lunch, come back, work until 5 or 6, and away we go. We leave work at home. Not perhaps because we choose to, unless we take a big portfolio and book with a bunch of papers home, but because that's how it works. It's not the way it is today. Today is so much different. Today we've got the ability to check our work, our emails, the minute we wake up, perhaps even right now. We can check during lunch. We can stir that spaghetti pot at dinner with a conference call on the go. We're on mute until we have to say something. We'll shoot time to chime in, say what we have to say, pause for a second, mute again, and keep stirring. Before we go to bed, we'll do another hour if we need to. We're at soccer practice for our kids. We're doing that one last thing that we need to do. And the numbers actually are pretty staggering. A big study was done in the States last year, and it turns out we check our phones 85 times a day. When people were asked, how many times are you on your phone? The average person responded 40. It's so habitual, it's so routine, that we don't even realize we're doing it anymore. 3.5 hours is the amount of time that we're spending on our phones. If anyone read Tipping Point, Malcolm Gladwell's book. Now, we can question the theory of 10,000 hours, but if we're looking at 10,000 hours to master something, we can do that. We can get master at scrolling through Trump videos and Gap videos in 7.87 years. Pretty incredible stuff. Now we're looking at the time we're spending in front of a screen up to 10 hours a day. You can slash that 7.8 years number in 3. It's incredible. And so when I look at this, I think, who are the ones that are getting the most out of life right now? These people. The ones who are watching the Queen walk by, and they're able to absorb it. I find that I'm the biggest proponent of fake news out there because I read one headline on Facebook that was catered to exactly what I'm looking for. I form an opinion on it because I'm not getting the information and reading through it. And I pass it along to another person, to another person, to another person, until this vicious game of telephone happens. And what was never true in the first place becomes so far from the truth that it was never even a story in the first place. And so when I look at this, I look at, again, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I look at how are we getting the sense of belonging. I'm talking to teachers right now who are looking at kids in grade 1, kindergarten, grade 2, and they said they don't have the skills to mitigate or to deal with conflict anymore. Why? Because they were raised on iPads. It's too easy to hand a kid an iPad instead of dealing with some of this conflict. And when I look at a fast food restaurant, when I look at Starbucks' new app, when I look at McDonald's new app, I can order when I'm 10 miles away and pick it up. I don't have to talk to anyone. Why would you? It's not. I got places to be, people to see, things to do. So do we all. And when I wonder next, when I've got to make a reservation at a restaurant that I don't want to call, well, it turns out Google's got my back there too. Earlier, at a big launch they had this year, just in July, they announced a new AI that can make various appointments for us. This one AI was making an appointment at a restaurant. Here's how it worked.
Yeah, may I hear you?
Hi, I'd like to reserve a table for Wednesday the 7th.
For 7 people?
It's for 4 people.
4 people with
Next Wednesday at 6 p.m.
Actually, we leave there for like after like 5 people. For 4 people, you can come.
How long is the wait usually to be seated?
When tomorrow or weekday or?
For next Wednesday, the 7th.
Oh no, it's not too busy. You can come for 4 people, okay?
Oh, I gotcha. Thanks.
Pretty incredible stuff. I mean, that can then seamlessly integrate with your Gmail calendar and you're set for next Wednesday. Then it can automatically invite the people that you want to be there, notify them as well, and you're off to the restaurant. So when I look at this evolution of work, I look at this evolution of communication, I look at this evolution of technology, I wonder if, in fact, we've actually lost the sense of belonging. I read a big study out of the BBC yesterday, 55,000 people, that now 30% of the Western world is feeling alone often or always. A Harvard Business Review study came out in October of last year that said today over 40% of adults in America report feeling lonely. And the research suggests that the real number may be well higher. Additionally, the number of people who report having a close confidant in their lives has been declining over the past few decades. In the workplace, many employees and even half of CEOs report feeling lonely in their jobs. Why is that? Well, I think, again, in a world that is entering or is in the middle of this, what I would call honeymoon phase of technology, where we can work from more places, more times of the day, more devices than ever before, it's not really about work-life balance. Work-life balance suggests that we have work and we have life and we can balance the two. Now they're so integrated that it's tough to separate them, right? It's now an integrated work-life balance. Totally different conversation we had even 10 years ago. The gig economy, 9 years old. iPhone, 11 years old. Facebook, 2006, so 12 years old. I actually don't think we give ourselves enough credit for being as good as we are to adapting to new technology. So my question to you, perhaps rhetorically, is in a world that's never been this connected, have we ever been so disconnected? And And I ask you this because I think it's important to understand where we are and how we got here. And I think that's a really interesting segue to say that if work is bigger and more of an identifier of who we are than it's ever been before, then I think really we need to rethink culture and talent attraction altogether. Because we're not hiring for a 9-to-5 transactional job, we're hiring for a lifestyle. If I asked someone 10 years ago what you did for work, I get slapped on the wrist. That's not what you're supposed to ask. You're supposed to ask who they are, not what they are. Well, they're kind of one and the same, whether we like it or not. And I think that's one of the big tension points in the workplace today. Who you are, who you spend your time with, where you volunteer, what sort of community work you do, what conversations you have, are all because of the work that we do. So I think we really need to rethink culture altogether. I'd like each of our organizations to have our culture seem almost like cilantro, really, like black licorice, like Hamel and pineapple, of which I don't want any of them. And why that's good is because if we can proactively talk about our culture in a polarizing manner, much like cilantro, and have people self-identify or vet themselves in and out of these employment opportunities, maybe this ever-declining tenure that we've seen can reverse. The now studies are showing that the average person that's coming out of high school right now will have 13 jobs by the time they're 40. What? This is the problem. And I think we can change it. Because I think the way that we look at culture right now is a bit of a disaster. In fact, I looked at the contributing factors to culture, and this is what I got. This mess of equally important words that some people value more than others. We talk about values like integrity, honor, and respect are something that only select people have, that they're really going to hone into when we look at the job description. And we think that because we've got these awards of best workplace, most diverse culture, best managed companies, that we should be attracting better talent. I think unless we actually understand why we've got a best place to work, why we've got a best managed company, and why our people love our places to work, we're actually doing ourselves more harm than good. I think if we've got that Alberta Best Top 70 Employers sticker on our website, first of all, for those who have it, congratulations. It's a really hard badge of honor to get. Now, I challenge you to take it one step further to say, okay, we've got it. Why did we get it, and how can we tell that story? Because a culture at CBRE might be a toxic culture at Colliers. There's no right or wrong, there's just true and untrue. When we look at the Fortune Top 100 places to work, Salesforce this year is #1 in America. Number 2 is Wegmans, a grocery chain. Wegmans pays $7.25 an hour. Yet people love to work there. I suggest, though, that people that work at Wegmans wouldn't necessarily want to work at Salesforce, and people that work at Salesforce wouldn't necessarily want to work at Wegmans. So unless these companies are actually articulating what makes them a best place to work, I wonder if it's doing any more harm than good, because I don't think a best culture exists. An optimized one, though, certainly does. An optimized culture is one where that stated and the realized experiences are the same. So if we've got our mission, vision, values on that boardroom wall, on the pamphlet, on the career page, and then we ask someone who's sitting in our desk, what's it like to work here? And they say nothing like anything's on the wall. How can we possibly try to attract and retain people? It doesn't work. So I took this complexity of culture and I tried to simplify it. On the why, I put time at work. We can agree that at Amazon, we've heard it even back in 2015, people are spending 12, 14, 16 hours a day at work. When I look at FedEx, perhaps more 9 to 5. You're by yourself, you're delivering packages, fantastic. I look at Google, hyper collaborative, very progressive, but they also spend a lot of time at work. They invest in their workplaces, and people respond accordingly. Zappos, we've all heard about Zappos and their incredible culture, but when I looked at the Forbes engagement ranking, the inaugural engagement ranking in 2017, guess what? 1, 2, 6, and Zappos, I think, quit trying. So there's no correlation between how much time you spend at work and how collaborative you are, or how isolated you are, because there's no best culture. If we can understand our components, our artifacts, our rituals, our traditions, and tell that story, that's when we're going to start attracting the right person. I think actually Zappos gave up, because if you take a look at their culture...
You talk about work-life separation. And for us, our approach is really to focus on work-life integration, because at the end of the day, it's just life.
The Zappos culture is unlike anything else I've ever seen. We joke that it's happier than Disney.
It's like a family. It's like this big family, and we're happy to see each other. We come to work, we enjoy it, and we have fun here.
Company culture is our main business strategy. It's the #1 priority of the company.
I think that we've always felt that competitors could copy our selection, they can copy our shipping, but one thing that could never be copied was our company culture.
I mean, take it from Fred No Title Mosler, right? I mean, their culture can't be copied. And when I look at Zappos, cilantro, nope, not a chance. I'm sure many of us in here will think the same thing. They actually offer their employees after 2 months $2,000 to quit. Because if you actually buy in past that 2-month period, you know you're ingrained in their culture and like the experience, right? So what I would suggest when it comes to workplace culture is that the grass isn't necessarily greenest on the other side, it's greenest wherever it's water. I think we spend so much time comparing and contrasting with other organizations that we forget to look inside. Forget to optimize our culture because we're trying too hard to be like Google or get nap pods or have a dog running around in the office. Chances are our people are with us because of the culture that we've created and because of the stories that have come out of our organizations. But this leads me to this whole generational conversation. This generational conversation is not new. In fact, it's older than any of us in here. Here's a quote that I wanted to share with you. The children now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority, show disrespect for elders, and love chatter in the place of exercise. Does anyone know whose quote this is? This is a Socrates quote. A couple thousand years older than any of us. One more, a little bit more wordy. Today, suddenly, because all the peoples of the world are part of one electronically based intercommunicating network, young people everywhere share a kind of experience that none of the elders ever had or will have. Conversely, the older generation will never see repeated in the lives of young people their own unprecedented experience of sequentially emerging change. This break between generations is wholly new, it's planetary, and universal. This one's a little bit more tricky, but this is Margaret Mead in 1969. As soon as we sent the shuttle to the moon. So we note that when we took that shuttle to the moon, there were two 68-kilobyte computers that got us there. An iPhone 5, generations ago, is 250,000 times the computing power that these computers that took us to the moon did. This generational conversation isn't new. In fact, we're going to see the Time cover talk about the new generation. I'm not sure what it's called. We've had Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, so we'll probably go with like the battery generations, A, AA, AAA. I don't know what's next. It's coming. I can promise you that until we change this conversation. More importantly, though, I think we need to have a more serious conversation about this millennial group, right? Let me just ask, between what years were millennials born? Any thoughts? 90, 83 to 90, one more? 83, 95, here in 80s over here. I was curious, and so I did some research. I looked at the most serious research bodies I could find in both Canada and the United States, and there was no consistency. So you're just as right as you are, it's just as right as you are, it's just as right as I am. I like to say 80 to 95, just for consistency's sake. I don't think I'm any more right than anyone else. But if we look at MetLife, Nielsen Media Research, PwC, Gallup, Ernst & Young, Pew Research, Goldman Sachs, United Census Bureau, and the dictionary, they define it too. There's no consistency. My question then is how can we stereotype and generalize a generation that we don't understand? These narcissistic, job-hopping, not loyal, basement-dwelling, Xbox playing, Netflix-watching generation that just like sucks from society, right? I mean, statistically, we're looking at about 21% of this room, which, I mean, that's kind of what millennials suggest we're looking at too. 7.5 million Canadians that we're grouping because of their age. Kind of like their hair color or their shoe size. I mean, we're looking at a 35-year-old millennial who's preparing for their kid's graduation in their university education, if university is a thing. And we're looking at my younger brother who's got $25,000 student debt, and they're the same person. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's true for any generation. And so when we're trying to actually change this recruitment conversation, we need to be talking about who people are, what their values are, what their experience are, what their desired experiences are, and not their age and their sex. I think this diversity and inclusion conversation is a bit misled too, because you can have a diverse workforce, and you can include everyone in the conversation, but unless they feel like they belong, like their voice can be heard, that they're psychologically safe, that they have that sense of belonging and love, and self-esteem needs and self-actualization needs met, kind of missing the mark. I actually don't think we have a talent problem. We've got an information problem. The war on talent, I think, is something that we've made up because we've been telling the same story for 40 years. What's that story that we're telling? Well, it kind of looks like this. This is actually a Calgary company I pulled this year. It's a one-page job description that just looks at your skills, your experience, your skills, and the conditions. How is somebody going to move from Toronto to Calgary, take this as a job, and think, yeah, I'm going to be a great fit here? It's not going to happen. In fact, I actually looked at human resources just in Calgary. I pulled this up last night. There are 26,161 positions. And until we start talking about a different story, about what our artifacts, our rituals, our traditions are, forget millennials, we can't attract anyone. No wonder the 10 years is bad as it is. It just doesn't make sense. In fact, I actually think that talent attraction is a lot like fishing. I used to grow up fishing with my grandfather, and I remember this one time specifically, I was about 6 years old, and I kept pulling that same fish out of the water. It was bleeding out of the other side of the mouth. I knew I caught the same fish twice. Meanwhile, he's sitting over there, calm, cool, and collected, just reeling a fish in like it's his day job. It kind of was his day job at that point. And I looked over at him and I said, how do I catch a different fish? You know what he said? He said, change the bait. He then taught me the definition of insanity, and at 6 years old, that was a tough one to take. I said, well, I have tried everything. He said, well, have you tried changing the bait? I said, no. I said, well, you know, insanity is doing the same thing over and expecting a different result, right? Thanks, Grandpa. Change the bait. And so I look at this, and I think that if we can start changing the bait and telling a different story to attract a different candidate, maybe then it's not about attracting millennials at all. Maybe it's about attracting an individual who wants the experience that our people already have and love. It's not about that one-page job description. It's about something so much bigger. It's about taking an iPhone and saying, okay, what does a day in the life of look like for you? What time do you wake up? What time do you go to bed? How are your weekends? What do you do for volunteer opportunities? Do you work by yourself or do you work on a team? Do you meet with your senior manager once a week, once a month, once a year? There's no right or wrong. There just is or isn't. And the more we can understand about that experience, then maybe it's not about the logo or the best managed company list or that stamp of approval that we get from somebody else. Maybe it's about something that much bigger. So I came in from Vancouver yesterday, and there's a company in Vancouver called Arc'teryx. I'm sure many of us here in Calgary have heard of Arc'teryx. We've got the jackets, the Gore-Tex jackets. And they went through this exercise because they didn't say, okay, what is our culture? What are our values? They did an 18-month deep dive with their employees, and they said, who are we really? And how can we help our story and our identity change how we attract talent? I want to show this to you because it is truly incredible.
I've been in this industry for 48 years, and I came to Arc'teryx thinking I knew it all. Apparently I didn't.
So I don't think Arc'teryx could have been created anywhere else, because ultimately the founding design spirit, those people were doing it anyway.
It's like lifetimes worth of adventures.
All of the inspiration, all of the needs that need to be solved are born out in the mountains.
We have to keep in mind, like, what's that next way? What's that relentless attention to better?
Most people in the design center aren't designers.
You get in here and it's a workshop for sure.
You're always working with uncertainty. Every day we come in not knowing if what we build is going to work.
It's a bold outlook on design, not to be afraid just to go and try it.
I'd argue Arc'teryx is the hardest pushing door.
They actually designed a jacket that, for me, transformed the market.
It raised the bar for the entire industry in terms of the kinds of performance that could be achieved.
We've chosen to maintain the knowledge of manufacturing and not let it go.
The procedure of productions is so complicated.
We're not built by robots, right? It's not automation.
I don't think we mass produce, I think we mass craft.
Everything is connected. It's just this amazing map.
The reality of every single piece that you buy is this concept that they're made by machines, and they're not made by machines, they're made by human beings.
So this is a company who took a lot of what I'm talking about, perhaps a lot of steps further than we needed to, but the point remains. You know exactly what you're getting when you look at Arc'teryx, about who these people are, about what they value. We talk about diversity and inclusion and belonging. It's truly ingrained in what they're doing over at Arc'teryx. And one of my favorite lines is that people like us do things like this. And I challenge you as organizations, even if it's on an iPhone video, or telling these stories and understanding the life that you live, the life that you love to live. And so we can tell that story to attract other people that want that experience. That maybe it's not about generations. Maybe it's not about hair color, shoe size. Maybe it's about who we are and what we value. Because if work is something bigger than it's ever been before, that the world that we're living in is moving faster than we've ever seen, that I think we take this work conversation a little bit more seriously in terms of the life that we live as a result of it. So if we rethink culture and talent attraction altogether, and tell a bit more of a cumbersome, holistic story, I think we've got some great potential. So my time is up, but I wanted to talk about how we are, where we are, and how we got here, and so that we could rethink culture and talent attraction altogether. Michelle's got the next 30 minutes, but I'm looking forward to answering your questions just after that. But until then, thank you for your time.